The desert breathed in silence. A copper sun hung low, bleeding across the horizon, and the river twisted like a thin silver vein through the dust-choked land. Heat shimmered over the rocks, where every shadow looked like a place where something had died. If you're new here, subscribe to the channel and tap the bell icon. Stories like this deserve to be remembered. Ethan Callahan sat high in the saddle, his horse shifting beneath him with the tired patience of an animal that had seen too many miles. The cowboy's hat brim was pulled low, shading a face carved by sun and regret. He wasn't a drifter by nature, but by consequence, a man carrying the weight of choices that never seemed to fade, no matter how many miles he rode. The river drew him closer. It was the only sign of softness in this barren place, and Ethan needed water. As he approached, he heard it, not just the lap of water against stone, but a sound lighter, sharper, fragile. A whisper. He turned his head. At first he thought it was the wind, but then he saw movement, a dark shape half hidden among the reeds at the river's edge, a woman. Her skin was sun-burnished, her black hair tangled with riverweed. She crouched low in the shallows, water clinging to her torn dress. Her eyes, sharp, defiant, unlocked onto his, though her lips trembled when she spoke. "Cowboy, don't look. They left me with nothing." Ethan froze in the saddle. The words crawled under his skin, twisting like barbed wire. He shouldn't stop. Every lesson the frontier had taught him said to keep riding. She was Apache. Her people were at war with his kind, or maybe his kind was at war with hers. Either way, he had no business being near her. But her voice, it wasn't the cry of someone weak. It was survival, raw and bitter. He dismounted slowly, boots sinking into the sandy riverbank. His horse snorted uneasy, the woman's gaze hardened. She pulled her arms tight across her chest as if bracing against shame more than cold. Her body bore bruises, her clothing torn as though ripped by cruel hands. Ethan didn't need her to tell him what had been done. A group of men had passed through here. Soldiers, outlaws, mercenaries, men who treated the frontier like a hunting ground, and they had left her alive not out of mercy but mockery. Ethan's jaw tightened. He had seen this before, and every time it returned to him at night, pressing on his conscience like a stone he could never put down. "I ain't here to harm you," he said quietly, his voice low, careful. She narrowed her eyes, distrust burning in them. Then right away, "I have nothing for you to take." The cowboy stood there, the river murmuring between them. He thought of his brother, Daniel, the memory that haunted him most. Daniel had once ridden with men like the ones who had hurt her, hunting camps for profit, scalps traded for whiskey. Ethan had walked away from his brother, but he had never stopped carrying the guilt. Now, looking at her, that guilt cut deeper than ever. He should leave. That was the safe choice. To walk into her world meant walking into danger, because the men who had done this would circle back. They always did, but Ethan Callahan had spent too many years looking away. "I ain't leaving you here," he said, voice firm but calm. The Apache woman straightened, defiance flashing across her face. "I do not need your pity, cowboy." "This ain't pity," Ethan replied. His hand rested on the worn grip of his revolver, not in threat but in readiness. His eyes scanned the cottonwoods, the ridges above the river. Every instinct screamed that they were being watched. "It's choice, mine, to stand here or to ride on. And I reckon I've made it." Her breath caught, anger and exhaustion warring in her expression. Finally, she turned her face toward the water, the words falling from her lips more like confession than plea. "They killed my kin, took our horses, burned what little we carried. And then," her voice faltered, catching in her throat, "they left me so the river could wash me away." Ethan swallowed hard. The sun had dropped lower, throwing long shadows across the sand. This wasn't just chance. This was the moment the desert had drawn him toward, testing whether he would keep running from his own failures or finally face them. He stepped closer, careful not to spook her. The horse shifted behind him, restless, as if sensing the tension thickening in the air. "My name's Ethan Callahan," he said. "I can't change what's been done, but I won't leave you for the buzzards." For a long moment she was silent, her eyes locked on him, unflinching. Finally she whispered her own name like it cost her breath to say it. Nayeli. The river flowed between them, quiet, carrying secrets downstream. And with that exchange, a name given, a name received, the bond was struck. Fragile, dangerous, forbidden. But real above them, the desert sky deepened into blood-red dusk. Somewhere far off, a coyote howled, mourning or warning. Ethan didn't know which. All he knew was that by stepping off his horse and into the river's whisper, he had chosen a road he could never turn back from. The cottonwoods along the river whispered with the evening wind, their pale leaves flickering silver under the rising moon. The river's murmur was soft, but beneath it lurked the heavy silence of land holding its breath. Ethan Callahan crouched low, one hand resting on the dark mane of his horse, the other gripping the worn handle of his Colt. Nayeli was beside him, wrapped in the shadows of the trees, her breath shallow but steady. "Tell me," he said, voice rough, quiet. "What happened here?" Her eyes glistened in the dim light, but her jaw was set hard. They wore blue coats at first, scouts, or so they claimed. But their tongues were wrong. Their eyes were wrong. Mercenaries, not soldiers. Hired killers with no country but gold. Ethan's stomach twisted. He'd seen their kind before. Men who traded honor for pay, drifting from war to war, feeding on the weak when governments turned a blind eye. "They came at dusk," Nayeli continued, her words clipped with anger, not grief. "We camped by this very river. My uncle raised his hands to parley, but they cut him down. They took our horses, burned our blankets, and left the children in the fire." Her voice caught for the first time, but she pushed through it. "Me they left behind. Not out of mercy. To shame me. To let me carry their cruelty like a brand." Ethan clenched his teeth, the river's silver gleam seeming to darken with every word. His brother had once stood with men like that. He'd walked away from it, but walking away didn't erase the blood. He forced his voice steady. "They'll come back. They always circle back." As if the desert itself answered him, a sharp crack echoed through the cottonwoods, the snap of a branch beneath a boot. Nayeli stiffened, hand instinctively brushing the knife at her hip. Her eyes darted toward the ridgeline. "One of them!" she hissed. Ethan pulled her close, guiding her deeper into the trees, pressing her low to the earth. Through the gaps in the branches, he spotted movement. A lone figure creeping down toward the river, rifle glinting faintly in the moonlight. The mercenary had returned to check his handiwork, maybe to finish it. Ethan's hand trembled against his revolver. He could ride away, take the horse, leave the woman. The man wouldn't follow if there was no witness. But as he glanced at Nayeli, crouched beside him with dirt streaking her cheek and fire burning in her eyes, he knew he couldn't. "Not again. Stay low," he whispered. The mercenary moved closer, boots crunching on the gravel bank. He scanned the river, his rifle slung loose but ready. His face was scarred, his beard ragged, the kind of man who killed without looking twice. When he stepped into the cottonwoods, Ethan acted. The gunfire cracked sharp and sudden, rattling the still night. Birds burst from the trees in a frenzy of wings. Ethan's revolver smoke curled in the air as the mercenary crumpled into the sand, his rifle clattering beside him. For a long moment, silence swallowed everything. The only sound was the rush of the river, unchanging, eternal. Nayeli stared at Ethan, her expression unreadable. Then she said almost coldly, "You killed for me." Ethan holstered the Colt, exhaling slow. "No, I killed because he would have killed you. And me." Her eyes searched his, testing for weakness, for lies. "Do not think this binds us, Cowboy. I am not a burden to be carried. I will not bow my head to pity." Ethan felt something stir in his chest, and not anger, but a reluctant respect. "Pity's not what I see when I look at you. I see someone still standing. After all that, stronger than me, maybe." For the first time, the edge in her gaze softened just slightly. The moonlight touched her features, and Ethan saw not just the scars of what had been done to her, but the unbroken will underneath. They moved the body into the river, letting the current take it downstream. The water closed over it without ceremony, carrying death away into the darkness. But Ethan knew the others would come. One scout missing was enough to stir suspicion. When they found his body washed up, blood would follow. "We have to move," he said. "They'll track us." Nayeli nodded, standing tall despite her torn dress, her voice firm. "Then we move. And when the time comes, we strike back. I do not want your protection. I want justice." Her words cut through the desert air like flint striking stone. Ethan met her eyes, and though every instinct told him to keep this woman at a distance, some part of him recognized the truth. She wasn't asking to be saved. She was asking to fight. The night deepened, shadows thickening under the cottonwoods. Together they mounted his horse and slipped into the wilderness beyond the river. Behind them the cottonwoods whispered as if bearing witness to a vow neither had spoken aloud. Two souls, scarred and mistrustful, bound now by danger. The desert stretched before them, vast, merciless and alive with the promise of vengeance. The desert sky burned with stars, endless and merciless as though heaven itself were watching without pity. The land lay silent save for the sigh of the wind through canyon stone and the faint crackle of firewood. Ethan Callahan sat cross-legged near the fire, the orange glow painting harsh lines across his face. His revolver rested close by, but his hands were steady, palms spread toward the warmth. Across from him, Nayeli crouched low, her dark eyes unblinking, firelight dancing in them like storm sparks caught in glass. They hadn't spoken much since slipping away from the cottonwoods. Silence had been safer. But now, with night pressing down, the silence grew heavy, thick with words unsaid. At last, Nayeli broke it. "Why do you do this?" Her voice was calm but cutting. "Why risk your life for me?" Ethan looked into the flames, then up at the starlit black. He could have given her a simple answer, that it was the right thing to do, that no one deserved what she had endured. But she wasn't asking for kindness. She was demanding truth. "Because I owe a debt," he said finally, his voice low, gravel thick, "one that can't be paid." Her gaze narrowed. "To whom?" Ethan swallowed hard, the memories stirring like rattlesnakes in the dark. "My brother, Daniel. He rode with men who hunted Apache camps, took scalps, burned villages. I tried to stop him once, but he laughed, called me soft. Said the frontier was for takers, not mourners." He paused, the fire snapping between them. "I walked away, but I didn't stop him. Didn't stop any of them." The weight of his words hung heavy. Ethan's shoulders bowed as though confessing to her meant confessing to every soul lost in those raids. Nayeli's face didn't soften. If anything, her stillness was sharper than anger. "And you think saving me wipes your brother's sins away?" "No," Ethan said, his jaw tightening. "It don't, nothing could. But maybe it keeps me from becoming like him. Maybe it lets me breathe at night without hearing their screams so loud." For a long moment she studied him, as if weighing the measure of a man who carried guilt he couldn't bury. Then she turned her face toward the fire, shadows catching the curve of her cheek. "My son died last winter," she said, voice like stone scraped against stone, a fever that no herb could cure. "He was small, smaller than my arm. I buried him at dawn, wrapped in deer hide with only my mother beside me." Her breath hitched, but she pressed on. "When I thought my heart had no more tears, these men came and burned the rest of my family. Took my uncle, my cousins, my mother. I stand now with nothing." Her words cut through Ethan like wind through canyon cracks, hollowing, relentless. "I thought the world had already taken everything it could from me." Nayeli continued, her voice growing sharper, angrier. "But the world is greedy. It will always take more." Ethan leaned forward, elbows resting on his knees. "And still you're here, still breathing." Her eyes flashed. "Because I choose to breathe. Not because I am weak, not because you rescued me." Ethan didn't flinch under her fire. "I didn't say you were weak. I said you're still standing. That's more than most." The fire crackled between them. The silence that followed no longer empty but charged, like the quiet before a storm. Nayeli shifted, hugging her knees, watching him with an expression that was both wary and searching. "You speak like a man who hates himself more than he hates his enemies." "Maybe I do," Ethan admitted. "But hating myself don't change what's been done. All I can do is choose different." She tilted her head, studying him as though trying to see if there was truth behind the scars on his face, behind the guilt in his eyes. For the first time, something softened. Not forgiveness, not trust, but a thread of recognition. Two people cut open by the same blade of history, bleeding differently but bleeding still. The night deepened. Coyotes called far off in the canyons. A cold wind swept across the desert floor, stirring the embers. Ethan tossed another branch onto the fire. Their eyes met again, and for a heartbeat too long, neither looked away. Something hovered there, fragile, forbidden, dangerous. Nayeli broke it first, turning her gaze to the stars. "We are not the same, Cowboy. You carry shame. I carry loss. They weigh different." Ethan's voice was quiet, almost a whisper. "Maybe, but they drag us both through the same dust." Her lips pressed into a thin line, but she didn't argue. Instead, She pulled the torn blanket tighter around her shoulders, leaning slightly closer to the fire. The orange light kissed her face, and Ethan, watching her, felt the ache of something he didn't dare name. They spoke little more that night, but in the spaces between words, something shifted. No longer strangers bound by circumstance, not yet allies, not yet more. But a thread had been tied between them, taut, uncertain, unbreakable. As the fire burned low and the stars wheeled silently overhead, Ethan closed his eyes, guilt pressing heavy but strangely lighter now that it had been spoken aloud. Nayeli sat awake longer, her gaze lost in the flames, whispering a prayer in her tongue, not for forgiveness, but for strength. And so under the endless desert sky, two wounded souls shared the same fire, the same silence, the same fragile beginning of a bond neither could afford yet neither could escape. The fire burned low, its glow staining the desert sand a dull red like old blood. The night wind whispered through the canyon walls, carrying voices that weren't there. Ethan sat across from Nayeli, the dying fire between them. He'd hoped silence might settle things, give her rest, but instead it grew heavy, like a storm waiting to break. Her eyes, dark as obsidian, never left him. "You've been hiding something," she said at last, her voice even, but edged like flint. He swallowed, his throat raw from dust and truth unspoken. "What makes you think that?" Nayeli lifted the small leather pouch that hung around her neck. Inside it were tokens of her family, a child's bead, a mother's woven charm. She pressed it to her chest. "Because I feel it, and because when you look at me, you carry ghosts that don't belong to you." Ethan's hand trembled against his knee. The desert around them felt suddenly suffocating, as if the stars themselves bore witness. He forced himself to meet her gaze. "My brother," he began, the words catching, "rode with men who hunted your people." The fire cracked, spitting sparks into the darkness. Nayeli stiffened, her breath caught sharp in her throat. "They raided camps," Ethan continued, shame weighing each syllable. "Took scalps, women, horses. I wasn't there, but I heard enough to know. And I did nothing to stop it. I was young, afraid, and I let blood spill because I didn't have the spine to turn against my own." Nayeli rose to her feet, turning from him. Her shadow stretched long in the firelight, quivering with her unsteady breath. "You think confessing makes it lighter?" she whispered, her voice trembling but strong. "You carry guilt like a badge, but I carry the bones of my people in the earth. My son, my husband, my kin. They cannot speak, but their silence screams. And your brother's hands. They are stained with that silence." Ethan stood too, though not daring to move closer. His voice was rough, pleading. "I broke ties with him long ago. I left because I couldn't stomach what they became. Every mile I've ridden since has been in search of some way to atone." Nayeli turned sharply, her eyes blazing. "Atonement is not yours to choose. Justice is not yours to name. My blood demands something you cannot give." Her words sliced deeper than any blade. Ethan's chest heaved, pain carved into every line of his face. For a moment neither spoke. The wind filled the silence, rattling through the cottonwoods along the riverbank. Then Nayeli stepped back from the fire, her face half in shadow. "If I stay, I betray my blood. If I leave, I betray my heart. Tell me, Ethan, which betrayal do you ask of me?" His jaw tightened. He wanted to reach for her, but his hands stayed at his sides, bound by shame. "I ask nothing," he said hoarsely. "Only that you know I'd rather die at your side than live with another lie." She shook her head and turned, walking into the darkness. Each step away felt like a knife twisting in him. The desert swallowed her shape, her outline fading into the whispering sage and sand. Ethan fell to his knees beside the fire, his body folding as if the weight of truth had broken him. He pressed his palms into the dirt, the smell of smoke and ash filling his lungs. In the dark, Nayeli stopped. The cold wind brushed her skin, carrying fragments of memory, her mother's voice, soft in chant, prayers sung over the sick, whispered to the stars. She heard it now, not with ears but in her marrow. "Do not let grief turn you into stone, daughter. Even stone cracks beneath time, but hearts, they must endure." Nayeli closed her eyes. The desert was vast, merciless. Alone she would wither like grass in drought. But bound to this man, this broken, guilty man, there was at least the chance of fire, of something human in the endless silence. She turned back. Ethan was still kneeling, his shoulders heaving with a man's helpless grief. His silhouette against the embers looked like a figure carved from sorrow. Nayeli stepped back into the firelight, her voice low but steady. I cannot forgive what is not mine to forgive. But I will not let the desert claim another life tonight. Ethan lifted his head, his eyes raw, shining with firelight and pain. She sank to the ground across from him, her hands trembling as she held the pouch against her heart. This is not forgiveness, she said. It is endurance. And maybe that is all our blood can give us. The fire sputtered, the last sparks rising toward the endless stars. The canyon walls loomed silent, as if holding the fragile truce between them. Ethan whispered, Thank you. Nayeli's gaze lingered on him, torn between fury and something gentler, something dangerous. She didn't answer. Instead, she let the silence stand, heavy but unbroken. The embers dimmed, the desert night stretched wide, and two broken legacies sat facing each other, bound by firelight, torn by blood and held together by something nameless. The first light of dawn struck the trading post like a blade, cutting shadows across the crumbling adobe walls. Silence reigned, the kind of silence before a storm, before a gun cracks the air and changes everything. The desert had grown cruel in the night. Cold winds bit through the gaps in the walls of the abandoned post while coyotes sang to the dying moon. Ethan leaned against the rough beam of the doorway, rifle in hand, his chest tight with dread. Beside him, Nayeli checked the tension of her bowstring. She had not slept. Her eyes glimmered in the half-light, sharp, unyielding. They'll come with the sun, she whispered. Ethan nodded. And we'll be waiting. The ground vibrated faintly with the approach of horses. Dust plumes rose in the distance, glowing pale against the awakening sky. 4 riders, 4 men who had carved their names in blood and cruelty. Ethan's gut clenched, recognizing their shadows before he could see their faces. The mercenaries drew near, rifles slung, eyes sharp and hungry. One spat into the dirt. Another chuckled, the sound echoing off the dead walls. Trading post, one sneered. How fitting. Let's see what's left to take. Ethan's voice cut low to Nayeli. Stay behind cover. Don't show yourself until... She interrupted, fierce. I am not hiding. Their eyes locked. Ethan saw not just grief but fire, the kind that refused to be extinguished. He gave a single nod. The riders dismounted, boots crunching against the gravel. The leader, a scarred man with a bandolier of shells across his chest, called out, Ranch hand. His voice carried like a whip crack. You've got something that belongs to us. Step out and maybe I'll make it quick. Ethan stepped into view, rifle raised. His voice was hoarse but steady. She's not yours. Never was. You'll leave here in the dirt same as you left her kin. The scarred man grinned, teeth yellow in the dawn. So be it. The first shot split the morning. Gunfire erupted. Dust leapt from the walls, wood splintered. Ethan dropped behind a crumbling wagon, firing back, each blast shaking his shoulder. One mercenary fell, his scream cut short as blood stained the sand. Nayeli moved like a shadow. She loosed an arrow that whistled through the rising dust, striking a gunman in the throat. He clutched his neck, gurgling, collapsing into silence. The battle tightened. Smoke, grit, and death mixed with the raw burn of dawn. Ethan rose to fire again, but a bullet grazed his side. He staggered, teeth clenched against the searing pain. Blood spread across his shirt, hot against the morning chill. Ethan, Nayeli's voice cut through the chaos. She fired another arrow, forcing one mercenary back behind a pillar. Ethan steadied himself, rifle in shaking hands, and shot the man square through the chest. Only one remained. The scarred leader. His grin was gone now, replaced by something feral. He circled the ruined post, eyes sharp, hunting like a wolf. Coward, he shouted. Hiding behind walls in a woman's skirt. Nayeli stepped into the open, bow drawn. Her voice rang clear. I am no one's skirt. The man raised his revolver, but her arrow struck first, slicing across his arm. He howled, dropped his gun, and charged at her. The bow clattered from her hand as he tackled her into the dirt. Ethan's heart lurched. Ignoring the pain in his side, he lunged forward, rifle lifted like a club. The butt cracked against the mercenary's skull. They grappled, fists in fury, dust rising in a choking cloud. The leader shoved Ethan back, pistol reclaimed, barrel aimed at Nayeli. Time seemed to slow. Nayeli grabbed a jagged shard of wood from the broken wagon and drove it upward into his ribs. He roared, staggering. Ethan's rifle barked once more, and the man fell, eyes wide, mouth open, body crumpling into the dust. Silence followed. Heavy, shaking silence, The rising sun painted the desert in fire. Smoke curled from the barrels of Ethan's rifle. His chest heaved, his blood dripping into the sand. Nayeli stood over him, breathless, hands trembling, her face marked with dirt and grief and something deeper. Only one rider remained alive, a younger mercenary, barely more than a boy who had frozen when the killing began. His wide eyes darted from the corpses to Ethan to Nayeli. Without a word, he mounted his horse and fled into the desert, vanishing into the horizon's blaze. Ethan sank to his knees, clutching his wound. "He'll bring others," he rasped. "Then we'll face them too," Nayeli answered, kneeling beside him. Her hands pressed against his side, trying to stem the bleeding. But not today. Their eyes met. In that look, battle-born and blood-forged, was something undeniable. Not romance yet, not safety, but trust. A forbidden closeness that had survived fire and lead. Ethan's hand, rough and shaking, found hers. She didn't pull away. The dawn burned bright over the trading post, casting long shadows of two souls bound not by choice, but by the violence that had tried and failed to consume them. The trading post lay silent, its adobe walls scarred by bullets and smoke, the ground littered with blood and broken wood. The first rays of sun spilled across the battlefield, gilding the dead in a cruel light. Ethan Callahan stood swaying in the doorway, his shirt dark with blood, his hand pressed hard against his side. Beside him, Nayeli emerged from the ruin, her bow still in hand, her braid undone. Dust streaked across her face like war paint. The desert stretched endless beyond the river, as though mocking the two souls left standing. The mercenaries were gone, 3 dead in the dust, 1 fled into the horizon. Only Ethan and Nayeli remained, battered, breathless, yet alive. Ethan staggered to his horse, gripping the saddle horn. His voice was hoarse, weary. "You should find your people again. If any remain. You've got no reason to keep riding with me." Nayeli's dark eyes fixed on him, steady, unblinking. She shook her head. "You would leave me here? Alone again?" "I don't want to drag you into more danger," he muttered. His face, shadowed by the brim of his hat, carried the weight of guilt, of blood ties and broken pasts. "Everywhere I ride, trouble follows. Men like me don't get to keep good things." Nayeli stepped closer, her voice softer now, almost like the river's murmur at dawn. "Cowboy," she whispered, echoing the first time he found her, half submerged in water, broken and trembling. Only now her whisper carried strength instead of despair. "Don't look away. They left me with nothing. Nothing but this choice. I will not be abandoned a second time." Her words struck deeper than any bullet. Ethan's chest tightened. He wanted to argue, to protect her by pushing her away. But when her hand brushed his, steady, firm, not pleading but resolute, he understood. She was not his burden. She was his equal in survival, in pain, in defiance. They saddled the horses in silence. Dust swirled in the new morning light. Ethan winced with every movement, his wound raw, but Nayeli steadied him, tying cloth around his side with careful hands. He tried to thank her, but she shook her head. "Save your breath," she said. "We will need it for the road." Her words were practical, but her touch lingered longer than necessity. For the first time since dawn's gunfire, Ethan allowed himself to breathe. They mounted up. Behind them, the trading post stood like a grave, its shadows long, its silence heavy. Before them stretched the wide expanse of the desert, rivers glinting faint in the distance, mesas rising like monuments, the horizon endless and uncertain. As their horses moved into the sand, the sun climbed higher, burning away the night's cold. Their shadows stretched long across the desert floor, 2 figures riding side by side, fragile but unbroken. Ethan's voice was low, almost lost in the wind. "Where does this road take us?" Nayeli glanced at him, her expression unreadable but strong. "Wherever we choose," he nodded, the words sinking deep. For once, choice felt possible, not dictated by blood, not shackled by guilt, but born of 2 souls who had survived when they weren't meant to. The river shimmered ahead, reflecting the fire of the morning sun. Its waters whispered with the same sound that had carried Nayeli's first desperate plea, "Don't look." But now, as they rode beyond it, the whisper seemed changed, no longer despair but resolve, carrying them toward an uncertain horizon that was somehow less lonely than before. The desert wind rose, carrying the scent of mesquite and dust. The 2 riders pressed on, their figures shrinking into the vastness of the land, until they were little more than shadows stretching across eternity. And in that image, The cowboy scarred but unbowed. The Apache woman fierce and unbroken. There was something fragile, forbidden yet eternal. That was my story. If it reached you, tell me what you felt. Don't let silence bury us again. Drop your thoughts in the comments and tell me where in the world you're listening from.